The midday sun burned brightly above the solemn grounds of Arlington Cemetery, its rays glinting off the polished stones that marked row upon row of sacrifice. A heavy silence draped itself over the place, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves. In the distance, tourists stood scattered across the pathway, their cameras poised, their voices hushed by the gravity of where they stood. For many, this was not just sightseeing, it was a pilgrimage, and as the silence shifted, through the crowd stepped a man with a swagger that clashed violently against the sacred stillness. He was broad-shouldered, his chest puffed, his black karate gi hanging loose as though he were preparing for a performance. His grins stretched wide, cocky, almost theatrical, as if the world itself was his audience. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, sensing the disruption before it even began. Veterans in the crowd stiffened, their expressions hardening, their eyes narrowing. This was no place for spectacle. But the man, the so-called karate champion, thrived on attention. He raised his voice just enough for those around him to hear, sneering as he paced closer to the immovable figure who stood at attention before the tomb. "Let's see if these guards," he mocked, "are really as untouchable as they claim." Ripple of unease spread through the gathering. Some gasped in disbelief. Others chuckled nervously, unsure whether this was some kind of act. A few even lifted their phones higher, desperate to record what felt like the start of something reckless. Guard did not move, not an inch. Dressed in immaculate uniform, rifle steady at his side, he was a living statue. His gaze never faltered, fixed forward with a discipline carved from years of sacrifice. Every muscle radiated stillness. Every second of silence spoke, louder than words ever could. The champion smirked, circling slowly, feeding on the crowd's divided energy. Each step he took seemed to challenge the very weight of the traditions this guard embodied. The crowd thought they knew what would happen next. Surely the guard would step back, call for security, or break the rules of his post. But he did none of those things. He simply stood resolute, unmoving, an unshakable pillar of honor. And in that frozen moment, a feeling swept through the air. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. The crowd thought he would step aside, but in the next moment, the world saw what honor truly means. Something unforgettable was about to happen. The guard, who stood so still in that moment, was not just a soldier in uniform. He was a man shaped by battles both seen and unseen. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Hale, a veteran who had once served in the dust-choked deserts overseas. He had enlisted young, full of fire and conviction, eager to fight for something larger than himself. But war had a way of carving men open, of leaving scars no medal could ever cover. Daniel carried those scars quietly. In the chaos of battle, he had lost his closest friend, Corporal James Turner. The two had been inseparable, brothers in everything but blood. They had trained together, eaten from the same rations, shared stories of the lives they wanted after the war. But one morning patrol turned to tragedy when an IED detonated, ripping the air apart with fire and steel. James was gone in an instant, and all Daniel could do was clutch the shattered dog tag that was left behind. That piece of metal, scarred and bent, never left his pocket again. It was his reminder of sacrifice, of silence, of promises unkept. When Daniel returned home, he carried more than just grief. He carried a determination. He refused promotions, refused flashy assignments. Instead, he applied to become part of the Tomb Guard, the unit tasked with guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. To the untrained eye, it looked like formality, men in pristine uniforms, standing motionless hour after hour. But to Daniel, it was the ultimate act of respect. Here, silence spoke louder than rifles. Stillness was not weakness, it was strength. Every step of the guard's training drilled discipline into his bones. No distractions, no indulgence, no break in duty. To flinch, to falter, to look away even for a moment was unthinkable. He learned to march with precision, to hold his rifle with flawless symmetry, to stand through blistering sun, icy rain, and biting snow. Nothing mattered but the vow, never falter, never fail. And so, Daniel stood that day not as a man, but as a symbol of all who could no longer stand for themselves. But fate had a way of testing even the strongest vows. The man who strutted into that sacred silence had no understanding of what such vows meant. Known only as Victor Kane, he was a former karate champion turned media spectacle. Once, his name had carried respect in martial arts circuits. He had trophies lined up in glass cases, medals gleaming on his walls, but victories faded, and so did the applause. Victor craved the spotlight, even when it meant tarnishing his own legacy. He discovered a new stage, humiliating men in uniform, He mocked police officers, taunted security guards, and challenged bouncers in viral videos that spread like wildfire. His followers called him fearless, his critics called him reckless. But Victor thrived on attention. For him, disrespect was not shame, it was strategy. And now, he had set his sights on the guards. This will be my biggest clip yet, he told his cameraman earlier that morning, his grin stretching wide. Millions will watch me prove that. These statues can't fight back. He knew the rules. He knew the guards were sworn to silence, sworn to stand no matter what. To him, that made them easy prey. But he underestimated one thing: the line between patience and dishonor. The location itself could not have been more symbolic. The tomb of the unknown soldier was not just a monument, it was sacred ground, where countless families who never saw their loved ones return placed their grief. It was the beating heart of remembrance. Veterans brought their children there to teach them respect. Tourists arrived from every corner of the world, hushed by the gravity of the silence. The very air seemed to carry whispers of sacrifice. To mock this place was not just to insult a guard, it was to insult everyone who had ever given their life without recognition. It was to spit on the unmarked graves of heroes, and that is why the crowd's reaction was so divided. Some unfamiliar with the traditions snickered nervously, unsure if this was some kind of show. Others, especially veterans and families of fallen soldiers, felt a deep anger coil in their chests. Their jaws clenched, hands balled into fists. They wanted to shout, to intervene, but they knew the guard would not move, could not move. That was the rule, that was the vow. Daniel Hale had lived through firefights, through explosions, through nights of hearing his own pulse thundering in his ears while the world collapsed around him. But none of that tested him the way this moment would. He was not facing a battlefield, he was facing disrespect. And sometimes, disrespect cut deeper than bullets. The karate champion did not see the weight of the place, nor the tears in the eyes of the veterans who stood nearby. All he saw was an opportunity, and with every step he took closer to Daniel's post, with every mocking grin and arrogant sneer, the tension in the crowd grew heavier. The guard did not flinch. His stillness became unbearable to watch. The stage was set. The crowd was no longer relaxed. What had begun as a peaceful afternoon at one of the most solemn landmarks in the nation was turning into a spectacle, one that no one had asked for. The karate champion, Victor Kane, thrived on that very chaos. Every step he took, every cocky grin, every dramatic movement was designed to shift attention to himself. And unfortunately, it was working. He circled the guard like a predator, sizing up prey. Though in truth there was no contest of equals here. The guard did not move, did not acknowledge him, did not break the invisible wall of discipline that separated his vow from the world outside. Victor tilted his head, studying the immovable soldier. Then he leaned in, close enough that his words would be carried to the front rows of tourists. "Look at him," he sneered, "just a statue. That's all he is. A mannequin with a rifle." Some people chuckled nervously. Others hissed in disapproval. A middle-aged veteran in the crowd muttered under his breath, "You don't belong here, son." But Victor either didn't hear or didn't care. He clapped his hands dramatically, startling a few nearby children. "Come on, is this it? This is the legendary guard, standing still like a shock dummy." The guard's eyes never wavered. His rifle remained vertical, uniform sharp as if cut from the very stone that surrounded the tomb. His silence was both armor and weapon. Victor's smirk deepened. He bent low, squatting until he was level with the guard's expressionless face. "Can you even hear me in there? Or are you trained to block out reality too?" The tension thickened like storm clouds. A little girl tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering with wide, worried eyes, "Daddy, is he allowed to do that?" Her father shook his head slowly, lips pressed tight. Victor wasn't finished. He shifted to the side, suddenly clapping his hands near the guard's ear. The sharp sound cracked through the silence. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The guard didn't flinch. For a moment, Victor blinked, as though unsettled by the sheer lack of reaction, but then he grinned wider, interpreting stillness as weakness. He stepped back, raising his arms theatrically like a performer feeding off applause. "See, nothing," he announced, sweeping his hand toward the guard. "This is what you call defense. You're all watching a joke." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A group of veterans standing together exchanged glances, their anger barely contained. One of them, a man with silver hair and a cane, barked, "Show some respect. That man represents more than you ever will." Victor shot him a glance, smirking. "Respect? He's not even doing anything. Respect is earned, old man, not given." The insult cut deep. The veteran's knuckles whitened around the handle of his cane. But his wife placed a trembling hand on his arm, silently pleading for restraint. They all knew that guard could not be defended by anyone but himself, and he would not break his vow unless forced. Victor paced back in front of the guard, his tone growing sharper, more taunting. He stomped his foot in front of the soldier's boots, trying to draw a reaction. Nothing. He leaned in so close that his breath fogged the pristine shine of the guard's sunglasses. Still nothing. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't emptiness, it was pressure. It was the weight of history pressing down on the moment, daring anyone watching to ask themselves what it meant to stand for something greater than one's own pride. But Victor couldn't feel that. He only felt his own hunger for attention, bent down and plucked a small handful of dirt from the ground. Slowly, deliberately, he sprinkled it near the guard's polished boots. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in, recording every detail. A little boy gasped, his voice rising with innocent outrage. He can't do that. Victor smirked at the child. Oh, I can do whatever I want. Watch. He crouched again, this time dragging his hand across the ground so that dust rose up in faint clouds. He slapped his palms together, letting the dirt scatter across the guard's trousers. Stillness. Silence. Discipline. The guard didn't move. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a woman whispered, "How does he do it? How can he just stand there?" Another answered, "Because that's his duty. That's his honor." Victor straightened again, feigning a martial arts stance. He raised his fists, shadowboxing around the guard as though he was sparring with an opponent. "What kind of soldier are you if you can't even fight back?" He jeered. He threw a slow, exaggerated punch in the air, stopping inches from the guard's face. The crowd gasped as if expecting a blow to land. Victor laughed, lowering his fist. "That close," he said mockingly. "And nothing. Absolutely nothing." By now, the crowd was no longer a single audience. They were divided. Some stood in horrified silence, their hearts pounding with indignation. Others muttered angrily, some even calling for security. A few, still oblivious to the gravity of what they were witnessing, held up their phones eagerly, hungry to capture the viral clip, but none could look away. The guard's stillness had become the true spectacle. His silence spoke louder than Victor's every insult. Each second of restraint was a thunderous declaration, "I will not break." And that only made Victor bolder. He stepped in closer than ever before, so close that his chest nearly brushed the guards. He whispered loud enough for the crowd to hear, "You're nothing but a coward hiding in silence." The insult was designed to cut, to provoke. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a reaction, but the guard remained immovable, a fortress of discipline. Victor's grin faltered. For just a flicker of a second, beneath the confidence, something unsettled stirred. He had faced fighters, broken boards, sparred in championships, but never had he fought silence. Never had he faced an opponent who didn't need to move to win, but his ego demanded more. Backed up a step, then slammed his hands against his chest, shouting like a showman, "This is your hero." He barked at the crowd. A man who won't even lift a finger. Boos erupted. Veterans shouted at him. Parents shielded their children's eyes, unwilling to let them watch the desecration of respect unfold. But Victor basked in it, as if even outrage was fuel. And then he crossed a line that no one thought he would dot. Victor reached out and tapped the guard's shoulder. It was small, almost playful, but the symbolism was enormous. Gasps shot through the audience like lightning. The sacred line had been broken. This was no longer mockery, it was violation. Victor smirked, leaning in, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Do something. Statue, do something." The crowd's collective heartbeat quickened. Phones steadied, capturing what everyone knew would be the moment history recorded. Veterans muttered curses under their breath. Parents gripped their children's hands tighter. The stillness was now unbearable. It was the quiet before the thunder, the breath before the storm. The guard did not move, not yet, but the energy had shifted. Every person watching could feel it. The air vibrated with anticipation, the tension coiled like a drawn bowstring. They all knew it. Something was about to break, and when it did, the world would never forget it. For long moments it felt as if time itself had frozen. Victor Kane's hand still lingered on the guard's shoulder, the smirk carved into his face like a child who believed he'd just broken a priceless vase and gotten away with it. The crowd's gasp had risen like a wave, and then it collapsed into a suffocating silence. No one breathed. No one spoke. This was the line. The unthinkable line. Every guard sworn to this duty lived by rules older than themselves. No matter what, remain still. No matter what, honor the silence. To touch the guard was to desecrate that promise, and everyone there knew it. Victor leaned in, so close his words hissed into the soldier's ear. "Do something. Prove you're not just a puppet." and for a heartbeat nothing changed. The guard's eyes remained locked forward, his jawline as sharp and unmoving as the steel of his rifle. The crowd began to wonder, would even this insult be endured? Then it happened, a blur, a shift so fast it was almost invisible. The guard moved in a single explosive motion that spoke of years of drilled precision. The rifle swung off its line and locked across his body. His boots pivoted, polished soles scraping against stone with a sound that split the silence. And before Victor could even flinch, the guard's hand gripped his wrist, twisted with mechanical control, and redirected his balance. The karate champion, arrogant, untouchable in his own mind, found himself slammed flat onto the ground in one effortless sweep. His body hit the marble with a thud that echoed like a gavel strike. His breath exploded from his lungs in a stunned wheeze. The crowd gasped as one. The silence shattered into disbelief. A few screams of shock rose, followed by cheers that burst out like lightning cracks. But the guard did not indulge. He did not gloat. He did not shout. He did not even look down at the man groaning beneath him. With the same discipline that had carried him through deserts and funerals, through storms and endless silent hours, he released Victor's wrist, pivoted back, and returned to his position, rifle upright, eyes forward, stance flawless. As though nothing had ever happened. The contrast was almost unbearable. The man who had strutted and taunted now writhed on the ground, his GI rumpled, his breath ragged, humiliation burning hotter than pain. And beside him, the guard was once more a statue of honor, untouched by the chaos he had just quelled. The crowd was electric. Tourists clapped hands over their mouths, their phones shaking as they captured history in real time. Veterans stood, taller, chests swelling with pride, some saluting through eyes blurred by tears. Parents whispered to their children, "Watch closely. This is what real strength looks like." A child's voice broke through the clamor, high and trembling. "Daddy," he moved. It was more than movement. It was a statement, a reminder that silence was not weakness, that restraint was not cowardice. And when the line was finally crossed, discipline did not falter, it answered with precision. Victor groaned, trying to push himself up, but his pride was heavier than his body. He looked up, expecting mockery, some acknowledgement from the man he'd tried to humiliate. But the guard gave him nothing. Not a glance, not a word. To the guard, he was already irrelevant. The humiliation was complete not because of the takedown but because of the indifference that followed it. Security forces surged forward, boots pounding against the marble. Two men grabbed Victor by the arms, yanking him to his feet as he sputtered excuses. "It was just a challenge. I was just proving a point. He can't touch me like that." But his protests fell flat. The crowd wasn't buying it. The moment had spoken louder than any defense. Cameras zoomed in, immortalizing the scene, the cocky fighter undone by a single move, the guard's stance as flawless as ever. That clip would travel across continents, across languages, across screens both large and small. And all of it had unfolded in less than 5 seconds. The moment spread through the crowd in ripples, disbelief giving way to awe giving way to pride, pride giving way to thunderous applause. Cheers erupted, claps echoing against the solemn stone walls. Yet through it all the guard remained, untouched, his stillness now transformed from passivity into power. The silence he returned to was not emptiness, it was victory. Narrators and reporters in the days to come would argue about what mattered most. Was it the flawless execution of the move? Was it the speed, the discipline, the symbolism of honor, striking arrogance down? But for those who stood there in that exact moment, the truth was simpler. They had witnessed honor defend itself. The boy who had whispered earlier now tugged his father's hand again, his voice barely more than a breath. "Daddy, he's a hero." And as Victor was dragged away, still sputtering about fairness, still clutching his aching wrist, no one listened. No one cared. The crowd's eyes remained fixed on the soldier who had not broken his vow, who had stood until it was time to act, and then returned to silence. The guard had said nothing, but he had spoken volumes. Victor Kane's wrists were now locked tight in the grip of 2 stern security officers. His earlier swagger had melted into a pathetic shuffle as they hauled him upright. His GI was crumpled, his hair damp with sweat, his lips pulled back in, a furious snarl that fooled no one. "This isn't over," he barked, voice cracking as he struggled against the grip. "I was just testing him. This is a scam, a fraud." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Every eye in that courtyard, every camera lens, every phone lifted high, was pointed not at the disgraced champion, but at the man who had never once broken composure. The guard stood exactly where he had always stood, rifle upright, chin high, gaze fixed beyond the horizon, Unmoving, unshaken, unbroken, it was that silence, that stillness, that made Victor's shouting sound all the more ridiculous. One elderly veteran in the crowd, chest adorned with faded medals, muttered under his breath, but loud enough for those nearby to hear, "That man doesn't need to prove a thing, he already did." The words spread like fire. A ripple of agreement moved through the people, nods, murmurs, then full-throated cheers. Applause erupted, not the polite kind offered to street performers or parades. This was raw, unrestrained gratitude. Parents clapped until their palms stung. Teenagers hollered like they were at a championship game. Veterans stood straighter, some saluting with trembling hands, their eyes shimmering with tears that caught the sunlight. The moment had become something larger than spectacle. It was no longer just about one arrogant fighter testing his ego against a silent sentinel. It had transformed into something symbolic, an affirmation that honor still existed in its purest, unshakable form. Victor tried again to twist out of the officer's hold, his voice rising into a panicked shout. "He attacked me first. You all saw it." But the claim rang hollow. The truth was undeniable. The guard had not moved until provoked, not acted until touched. His response had been swift, precise, and controlled. Not an act of aggression, an act of defense. A defense not of himself, but of the very tradition he embodied, and the people knew it. Phones continued recording, live streams buzzing across the globe within seconds. Clips of Victor's humiliation raced onto feeds, captions already forming. "Karate champion humbled in 5 seconds by silent guard. Honor speaks louder than arrogance." The moment Arlington or the palace fell silent, Victor's fate was sealed before the authorities even marched him away. That as the officers dragged him through the courtyard, his protests dwindled into pitiful mumbles. He glanced back one last time, hoping, perhaps even begging for acknowledgement from the guard he had tried to humiliate, but the guard never turned. His silence was final. That was the true humiliation. Not the takedown, not the laughter of strangers, but the fact that the one man he sought to challenge deemed him unworthy of even a single glance. The crowd, however, gave Victor plenty of attention, though not the kind he wanted. Boos chased him as he stumbled, gears echoing between bursts of laughter. A group of teenagers mocked his earlier stance, puffing their chests and sneering. Children clapped gleefully, unaware of the deeper weight, but sensing the justice of the moment. And then, almost as if guided by instinct, the applause shifted, back to the guard. Hundreds of hands clapping, hundreds of voices cheering, not for violence, not for spectacle, but for the quiet reminder of discipline and dignity. One father lifted his young son onto his shoulders, pointing toward the soldier. "Remember this, son. Strength isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who stands the firmest." The boy nodded, wide-eyed, and repeated softly, "Honor." That single word seemed to hang in the air, wrapping itself around the crowd. Like a banner, a few tourists stepped forward cautiously, trying to leave flowers at the guard's feet. Security quickly redirected them, but the sentiment was unmistakable. People wanted to honor the man who had just reminded the world of something it had nearly forgotten. By now, Victor had vanished behind stone walls, swallowed by the justice system that would handle him next. His name would linger only as a cautionary tale, while the guard's nameless figure would rise into legend. Reporters scrambled to draft statements, eager to frame the story in headlines that would dominate the next day's news. But no clever phrasing could compete with the raw footage, already spreading like wildfire across social media. The clip needed no commentary. The silence spoke louder than any caption. As the cheers eventually softened, the guard's unbroken stance reclaimed the space. His stillness commanded respect in a way no roar ever could. Tourists lowered their cameras. Children hushed their voices. Even the rustle of trees seemed to quiet. The guard stood as he had before the incident, as though the interruption had never happened. His role was unchanged, his vow unbroken, and that, more than anything, struck the deepest chord in the hearts of those who witnessed it, because for the first time they realized this wasn't just a soldier standing watch. This was a living symbol of discipline, a man who embodied the weight of history, the sacrifice of countless others, the sacred duty of remembrance. The climax had ended not with shouting, not with violence, but with silence restored. And that silence was deafening. The courtyard slowly settled after the eruption of cheers, though the echoes of applause seemed to linger in the very air. Parents whispered explanations to their children, veterans stood with renewed pride, and tourists looked at one another, as if to confirm they had indeed witnessed something extraordinary. The karate champion was gone now, swallowed by the gates and security beyond. His voice, once booming with arrogance, had faded into nothing more than a faint memory, replaced by the collective awe that remained fixed on the motionless figure of the guard. For a long moment, silence reigned again, the rifle gleamed under the noonday sun, polished wood and steel reflecting unwavering discipline. The guard's chin never lowered. His eyes, still locked ahead, betrayed no triumph, no satisfaction, only the same steady vigilance as when the day began. It was as if nothing had happened, and that to the crowd was what made it so powerful. A woman near the front, tears tracing down her cheeks, whispered to her husband, "He didn't just defend himself, he defended all of us. He defended what this place means." Her husband squeezed her hand tightly, unable to speak, but nodding with a gravity that said everything. Across the plaza, an elderly veteran in a wheelchair raised his trembling hand to his brow in salute. His daughter beside him bent low, trying to wipe his tears discreetly, but he shook his head, letting them fall. For him, the guard's silent stand had carried the weight of every fallen comrade whose memory the tumor, the palace protected. Slowly, others followed his gesture. A ripple of salutes, nods, and quiet reverence spread through the crowd, not demanded, not asked, just freely given. And though the guard never moved, it felt, somehow, like he accepted every single one. By evening, the moment was everywhere. Clips filled every social media feed, from shaky phone recordings to crystal-clear livestream captures. Some cut the video short, showing only the guard's flawless takedown. Others stretched longer, including the crowd's stunned hush before the eruption of applause. Each version, no matter how short, carried the same message: honor speaks louder than arrogance. Hashtags trended worldwide. News anchors repeated the story with solemn voices. Commentators debated the meaning of discipline, restraint, and respect. Memes surfaced, too, some mocking the fallen karate champion, others glorifying the guard's unshakable stillness. But even the jokes carried a current of respect. In a time when noise and chaos seemed to dominate, people were suddenly drawn to the power of silence. At the barracks, away from the flashing cameras, the guard finally stepped down from his post hours later. He didn't walk with swagger or victory, he walked with the same steady rhythm as always, boots echoing softly on stone. Inside, an officer stood waiting, a colonel with silver hair and eyes hardened by decades of service. For a moment, the two men simply regarded one another. Then, slowly, the colonel raised his hand in salute. It was not casual. It was not perfunctory. It was sharp, deliberate, heavy with meaning. The guard, bound by discipline, returned the salute with equal precision. Nothing more was said. Nothing more needed to be said. For soldiers, words were unnecessary. Duty spoke, louder, but outside, among the people, the story was still alive. A father who had lifted his son earlier knelt that night beside the boy's bed. The child clutched a toy soldier in his small hands, refusing to let go. "Dad," he whispered, eyes wide in the dim glow of his nightlight. The guard didn't even move until he had to. He was so strong, stronger than the fighter. The father smiled softly, brushing the boy's hair aside. "That's true, son. Remember this. Real strength isn't about showing off. Real strength is about standing firm when it matters most." The boy nodded, holding his toy tighter. His last word before sleep was a whisper, "Honor." And somewhere deep inside, the father knew his son would never forget it. Over the following days, headlines carried the story farther. Veterans organizations praised the guard's composure. Educators shared the clip with students as a lesson in discipline. Even rival martial artists condemned Victor Kane's arrogance, insisting that true mastery meant respect. Victor himself faded quickly into infamy. Interviews painted him as reckless, desperate for attention. Some argued his career was over. Others said it never truly mattered. His name became a footnote, his humiliation, the only legacy people remembered. The guard's name, meanwhile, was never released. Regulations and tradition kept him anonymous, a faceless figure in uniform. But that anonymity only fueled the legend. He wasn't just one man anymore, he was every guard. Every soldier who had ever stood in silence, through rain or sun, through mockery or reverence, holding their ground not for themselves but for those who could no longer stand. And the world needed that reminder. Back at the tumor, the palace gates, the rotation continued. Guards marched in perfect rhythm, rifles clicking as they shifted. Tourists gathered again, cameras raised. But now, the crowd's whispers carried a different tone. Children pointed with awe. Parents spoke in hushed reverence. Veterans watched with tears welling. The memory of that one confrontation lingered in every heart, coloring the silence with deeper meaning. The guard on duty remained still, motionless, eyes locked forward. His face betrayed nothing. His body never faltered. He was unbroken, untouched by the noise of the world. And yet, to the crowd his silence roared louder than ever before. The story would fade from the news, eventually, replaced by the next spectacle. But for those who had been there and for the millions who had watched, it would never truly vanish, because in that single moment, a silent soldier reminded the world of something timeless. Honor is not loud. Honor does not boast. Honor does not seek the spotlight. Honor simply stands, and that is why it endures. There are moments in life that echo far beyond the walls, where they happen. What unfolded that day at Arlington before the palace gates wasn't just a scuffle between a fighter and a guard. It was a reminder that in a world obsessed with noise, with shouting, with proving who is stronger, sometimes the greatest power lies in silence. Don't think about it. The karate champion had training, fame, a body built for combat. Yet, all his strength crumbled in the face of one man's stillness. Not aggression, not ego, just discipline, just honor. That's the lesson that millions carried home. Parents teaching their children that respect is strength. Veterans remembering that their sacrifices were not forgotten. Even strangers online, thousands of miles away, pausing for a moment to feel something deeper than just another trending clip. Because what we saw wasn't just about one guard, it was about what he represented. Every soldier, every protector, every person who chooses duty over self. He stood, unflinching, not for recognition but for principle. And that principle struck harder than any punch ever could. So the question is, what about us? When life pushes against us, when arrogance mocks us, when the easy option is to step aside, do we stand firm? Do we hold our ground with honor, even if no one is watching? That's the challenge this story leaves us with. It's not about fighting back, it's about standing tall. It's about proving that dignity will always outlast mockery. The world will forget the name of the man who mocked, but it will never forget the silence of the guard who stood. If you believe honor still matters, share this story, pass it forward. Remind someone today that real strength is quiet, steady, unshakable. Because in the end, honor is not what we say, it's what we stand for. Asterisk.